They say the palace chooses silence over sound, and masks over faces. That within these gold-covered walls, beauty is power, and power is always watching. It was the day of the velvet ceremony, the one tradition the royal court never skipped, even when the empire was crumbling at its edges. Each year, the crown prince receives a velari. A gift, they call it. A companion trained from childhood to be perfect in every way. In music, in movement, in obedience. And if the rumors are true, in the art of quiet killing. The hall was lined with nobles. Their fans hid their whispers, their stares sharp beneath painted lashes. I stood above them all, on the dais of the throne, with a silver circlet pressed cold against my brow. I wasn't interested in the ceremony. I never was. Until he walked in. He was the last to enter. Barefoot like the others, but unafraid. Draped in pale grey silk, loose and unadorned. No jewels. No gold. Nothing to demand attention. And yet, he drew every eye. He didn't bow immediately. He stood still at first. Just long enough for the silence to stretch. Then, like smoke curling from a flame, he lowered himself, slow, precise, perfect. I should have looked away. I usually did. But his head lifted slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet. And he looked at me. Really looked. Not with fear. Not with flattery. Just stillness. Like he was waiting to see what I would do next. The master of ceremony announced his name, Eriyen. A whisper. Barely audible. But it settled in the air like the first note of a haunting song. The other velari were dismissed one by one, sent to ministers and nobles with greedy eyes and loose hands. My court expected me to refuse a companion again this year, as I always had. Too cold, they said. Too harsh. But I pointed to him. That quiet boy with gold-lit eyes and no smile. My choice is made, I said. Send the rest away. Gasps echoed like wind through empty corridors. But I didn't care. He bowed again, said nothing. Followed when the guards gestured. Obedient. Silent. But even as he walked behind them, I felt it, his eyes on me. Unblinking. I told myself it was curiosity. But now, I know better. That was the first time I saw Eriyen. And the last moment I could still pretend I was in control. They moved him into the east wing. My wing. The chambers there were colder, quieter, meant for someone who preferred distance. No courtiers lingered there. No soft laughter in the halls. Just silence, and the occasional echo of my footsteps. Eriyen did not speak when he arrived. The servants offered to draw his bath, to help unpack. He simply bowed, moved past them, and did it all himself. Neat. Efficient. Like he'd done it 100 times before. I watched from the upper balcony as he settled in. He folded his own robes, adjusted the incense tray with exact precision, and aligned his shoes perfectly at the edge of the mat. Not once did he pause to admire the room. Not once did he look at the golden embroidery or the view of the lotus garden. It was as if he didn't see any of it. Or as if it didn't matter. That night, I found him kneeling by the curtain outside my chamber, head bowed, hands resting loosely on his lap. "Is that where you intend to sleep?" I asked. He lifted his gaze. Calm. Unbothered. "If it pleases you, Your Highness." I didn't respond right away. There were beds in the next room. Velvet-lined. Comfortable. He could have asked. But he didn't. I turned away without answering. When I looked again, he had already closed his eyes. In the days that followed, I tested him. Small things at first. Left a scroll slightly out of place. A teacup turned the wrong direction. He corrected them all without being told. I asked for my robes before dawn. He arrived before I even called. I dismissed him with a vague command. He still returned on time, never late, never early. always exactly right, and never a word more than necessary. One morning, I watched him in the mirror as he adjusted my collar. His fingers brushed the base of my neck, light, practiced, brief. But I saw it. The pause. Just a flicker. A moment. He didn't look at me, but something in him shifted. And for reasons I couldn't explain, that single pause stayed with me all day. The court began to whisper that the cold prince had finally taken an interest, that I'd broken my vow to remain untouched by palace tradition, that this Valari must be extraordinary to keep my attention for more than a day. I let them talk. It was easier than explaining what even I didn't understand. Because the truth was, Eriyen didn't behave like the others. He didn't flatter me, didn't linger near my side, didn't try to win me over with soft laughter or charm. He simply existed in the corners of my world, silent, steady, ever present. A shadow I didn't ask for, but one I was starting to notice. And somehow, that was far more dangerous than anything he could have said. It happened on a morning so quiet, even the birds hesitated to sing. I had risen earlier than usual. The air was cool, the sky just beginning to fade from silver to blue. I walked the lotus garden alone, as I often did when I wanted to be forgotten. The guards knew not to follow, so I didn't notice the figure waiting among the reeds. He moved fast, too fast for a servant, too confident for a thief, but not fast enough, because Eriyen was already there. I hadn't heard him approach, hadn't even sensed him. One moment I was alone. The next, he was between me and the blade, moving like mist. The attacker lunged. Steel flashed in the morning light. And Eriyen didn't flinch. He caught the man's wrist with a quiet snap, twisted, turned, and in 3 graceful steps, it was over. No drama. No shouting. Just breath. The sound of silk shifting. And then silence. I stared at him. At the blood dripping from his fingers. At the calm stillness of his expression. He didn't look triumphant. Or shaken. Only steady. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice soft, as though we'd simply brushed shoulders in the corridor. I stepped forward slowly. "You knew." He lowered his gaze. "I suspected." "How long?" "A few days." "And you didn't tell me." His eyes lifted to mine, calm, unreadable. There are things better handled in silence. Later, after the guards arrived and dragged the body away, I sat with him in my study. Just the two of us. No advisors. No audience. He cleaned the blood from his knuckles in silence. I watched the way his hands moved, not nervous, not ashamed, just careful, measured, controlled. "You weren't chosen for your music," I said finally. He didn't deny it. I leaned back. "So why send you in at all? Why wait to strike?" There was a pause. Then he said, "You weren't the target. You were the test." My breath stilled. A test. To see if he could get close. To see if I would let him. I should have ordered him taken away. Questioned. Punished. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "From now on, you don't leave my sight." A flicker passed across his face. Barely a crack in the mask. "Is that a command?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "It's a warning." He bowed his head. Understood. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I feared him, but because, for the first time, I wasn't sure whether I wanted to keep him close to protect myself, or because I wanted to understand why, when I looked at him now, I didn't see a weapon. I saw a mirror. And it terrified me. After the garden, things changed. He didn't say more, didn't linger longer, but I noticed the difference in his silence. He watched the shadows now, not just mine, but the ones cast by the guards, the courtiers, even the servants who bowed too low when they passed my door. He noticed everything. And I noticed him. He no longer slept beyond the curtain. Now, his mat lay by the window in my chamber, quiet, unobtrusive, always there. I never told him to move it. I never had to. There were moments I'd wake before dawn, eyes half closed, and find him already sitting up, eyes on the trees, back straight as stone. He didn't startle when I looked at him. He just nodded once, the kind of nod that says I've been here. I'm still watching. Go back to sleep. And I did. One night, I couldn't sleep. The halls outside were too still. The torches too dim. My thoughts too loud. I stepped out into the corridor. He followed without a word. We walked through the inner courtyard, where moonlight soaked the stone tiles in silver. I didn't say where we were going. He didn't ask. We stopped at the koi pond. It was still, except for the occasional ripple of a fin. And that's when I heard it, soft. So soft I thought it was the wind. A hum. Barely more than breath. I turned. Eriyen was standing a few paces behind me, eyes closed, head tilted slightly upward. Humming. A lullaby. The kind only taught in the north. The kind I hadn't heard since I was a child. He stopped the moment he saw me watching. I didn't know you sang, I said quietly. I don't, he replied. And for once, I saw it, the faintest tug at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Not quite. But something close. It unsettled me more than his silence ever had. Later, back in the chamber, he brought me tea. I reached for it at the same moment he offered it. Our fingers brushed. Only for a moment. Only the lightest touch. But everything stilled. His hand trembled barely, almost imperceptible. I looked up. So did he. And for the first time, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It wasn't cold. It was warm. And unbearably loud. I didn't speak of it. Neither did he. But from that moment on, the distance between us felt smaller. Even when we said nothing. Even when the others entered the room and he returned to the corner like a shadow. I could feel it. The weight of a glance. The tension of a pause. The space between us, slowly closing. Breath by breath. They say Valari are taught to feel nothing. Not joy. Not pain. Not fear. Only silence. But I'd seen the tremble in his fingers. Heard the northern lullaby that slipped past his lips. And when I looked closer, I realized something no one else had. He wasn't empty. He was hiding. The week after the attack, the palace tightened its watch. New guards. New schedules. New rules whispered through the halls like smoke. But it was Eriyen who changed the most. He moved with more caution. Slept even less. Watched every open door twice before stepping through. And one night, I found him alone in the eastern tower, the place no one visited after dark. He didn't flinch when I approached. Didn't bow. He just stared out the window, hands clasped behind his back, like he'd been standing there for hours. You were followed, I said. He didn't answer. Was it someone from the court? A pause. Then, softly, it doesn't matter. It does to me. That made him turn. And for the first time since we met, I saw something in his eyes that unsettled me more than calmness ever could. Resignation. It was part of the contract, he said. My presence here wasn't just a gift. It was a message. To who? To anyone paying attention. I stepped closer. You knew they would try to kill me. I knew they might, he replied. But that's not why I'm here. I stared at him, waiting for more. But he didn't give it. Later that night, I ordered the servants to bring his file, the official record of every Valari assigned to the royal wing. What I found wasn't surprising. Not anymore. Eriyen had no known family. No province claimed him. No school marked his training. His assignment came from an anonymous request signed only with the royal seal. And still, he was perfect. Too perfect. That night, I left my chamber door open for the first time. Not as an invitation. Not even as a test. Just a small, silent signal. I woke sometime before dawn. He wasn't in the corridor. But when I turned my head, I saw his shadow seated just beyond the silk divider, beside the edge of the open door. Close enough to reach me, if he needed to. Close enough, if I needed him. He never crossed the threshold. Never spoke. But his presence was steady. And somehow, that quiet loyalty felt more dangerous than 100 whispered threats. Because it wasn't fear that bound him to me anymore. It was choice. And choice, in this palace, always comes with a price. It began with a message. A folded scroll, tucked beneath my breakfast tray, sealed with a symbol no one had used in over a decade. The mark of the outer court. The council was moving. Not just watching. Not just whispering. They were ready to act. And the first step was to remove the only person they couldn't control. That night, Eriyen was gone. His mat, untouched. His robe, folded. No word. No warning. I searched every corridor. Questioned every guard. But they said the same thing. We thought he was with you. He wasn't. And for the first time in years, fear sank cold into my chest. I found him in the Moon Hall, where the walls were lined with portraits of kings too proud to bend and queens too kind to last. He stood at the center of the room, hands bound behind him, 2 masked figures flanking him, silent, armed, and waiting for a signal. His eyes met mine. He didn't look afraid, only tired. They told me not to fight, he said. That you would understand. I stepped forward. I don't. They said I got too close. You did. His breath caught. Just slightly. But it was enough. I turned to the guards. Leave us. They hesitated. I didn't. That's an order. When the doors shut behind them, the silence was deafening. I moved to him, untied the cord binding his wrists. He didn't stop me. You were never just a gift, I said quietly. I know that now. I was never meant to stay, he replied. Then why did you? A pause. Then because you never asked me to leave. My hand stilled on the knot. And for the first time since this began, I let myself look at him, really look. Past the training. Past the masks. To the boy who hummed lullabies in the dark. To the shadow that stood beside me, night after night, never asking for anything in return. I'm asking now, I whispered. Stay. He didn't answer right away. But he stepped closer. And in that quiet moment, beneath a ceiling of faded stars and forgotten kings, he reached up. His hand brushed against my jaw, barely a touch. I leaned in. And when our lips met, slow, careful, steady, the world fell still. Not a kiss of victory. Not a kiss of possession. Just the truth, wrapped in silence. The kind of truth that needs no words at all. They kept the doors closed after the kiss. The court whispered, of course they did, but no one dared to say it to my face. Not anymore. Eriyen returned to my side as if he'd never left. He stood at the same distance. Woke at the same hour. Poured my tea without spilling a drop. But something had changed. Not in what we did. In how it felt. We didn't speak of the kiss. Not out loud. But sometimes. In the middle of a quiet evening, I'd catch him looking at me across the room, soft, unreadable, and entirely unguarded. And I wouldn't look away. It was during the rain that it happened again. A summer storm had rolled in over the mountains, flooding the gardens and washing the stone paths clean. The power flickered, and the palace went dim, candles lit in every corridor, shadows dancing across every silk-draped wall. I sat by the window. He stood behind me. I used to think silence was safety, I said. And now? I turned slightly. Now I think it's just waiting for the right voice to break it. He didn't answer, but I felt him move just a step, just enough to close the space. His hand came to rest gently on the back of mine. Careful, barely touching. Speak, then, he murmured, and I'll listen. That night, we didn't sleep. Not because of fear or duty. We simply stayed. Sat close enough to feel each other's warmth, saying nothing, letting the storm speak for us. He leaned against the wall, one knee bent, arms resting loosely on his lap. I sat beside him, our shoulders brushing. And in the silence between the thunder, he turned his head toward me, slow, deliberate, and met my gaze. There was no question in his eyes, only quiet promise. And when he leaned in this time, I didn't hesitate. We kissed again. Not like the first, cautious, half-held. This one was slower. Like he already knew I wouldn't pull away. And I didn't. Later, he traced my wrist with his thumb, lazy, absent. Is this allowed? He asked softly. I smiled, resting my head against his shoulder. Nothing about you ever was, I said. He didn't argue. But when he wrapped his fingers around mine, lacing them together in the dark, he held on like someone who had already chosen to stay. Weeks passed, and the palace settled into a strange calm. The whispers of the court still fluttered through the corridors, but they no longer reached us. The guards had learned not to question Eriyen's presence beside me, and the servants never raised an eyebrow when we walked through the halls together. The silence we shared had become something more, not empty, not heavy, but filled with a quiet promise. It was late afternoon when I found him standing by the garden wall, the sun casting long shadows across the stone paths. He wasn't looking at anything in particular, just standing. I approached him slowly, letting the quiet of the moment stretch out. There was something soothing about it, about the stillness that surrounded us, as if the world outside had stopped just for us to exist in this small, perfect space. He turned when I stopped beside him. You've been quiet lately, I said softly. He looked out at the flowers, their petals beginning to fold with the coming dusk. I've been thinking, he answered. About what? About everything that led us here. I smiled, leaning against the cool stone. Is that so unusual for you? He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not unusual. Just necessary. I understood. The months had passed since the day in the Moon Hall, when everything changed. And though we hadn't spoken of it directly, there was a comfort in the way we simply knew. We had both seen the cracks in the facade, the careful walls we had built around ourselves. And now, we no longer needed them. We were no longer shadows in each other's lives. We were something more steady and real. That evening, as the last light of the sun dipped below the horizon, he reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, like they always were now, never far from mine. Will you stay with me? I asked, voice low but sure. He nodded without hesitation. I never left, he said softly. In the days that followed, the palace continued to function as it always had. The court's intrigues still simmered beneath the surface, but we no longer let them touch us. Our world had become a small, intimate one, the quiet moments shared in the early mornings and late nights, the brief smiles exchanged across a crowded room, the silent understanding that filled the spaces between us. We didn't need grand gestures. We didn't need to explain ourselves. We just existed. Together. In the garden, beneath the shade of the ancient trees, I leaned in and kissed him once more. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because, in that silence, it was the only thing left to say.